Hello, guys and gals, and welcome. Welcome. So, Path of Exile 2, content update 0.30, the third edict, is going to be coming on August 29th, and I just finished going over all of the reveal information, and it took quite a long time. I don't know exactly how long, but it was like 4 p.m. to like, what is it right now? 11? So like 4 to 5, 5, 6, 6, 7, 7, 8, 8 to 9, 9, 10, 10 to 11. So it's like 5, 6. I've been at this for like 7 hours, basically. And there's a lot to go over. I'm gonna try and abbreviate, like sum all this up for you guys. But if you'd like to see the full version and go over all the patch notes, of course you can always watch the live stream. I go over everything and examine everything like bit by bit and really like pull out all the nitty gritty. But this is going to be a quick overview of the changes and honestly what I think of them. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to start off with the overall feeling of the changes. How are the changes? Really good. At first, I was pretty sure that there was almost like no negative changes whatsoever in the patch notes. It seemed like everything that they were doing was very good. But as I read the full version of the patch notes, there are some minor things in there that kind of like are nerfs. But I feel like for the most part, like I'd say like 94%, let's say 94%, all of the changes that they made are extremely good, and I think you'll agree. They're going to have a free weekend uh, on the 29th to the 1st. So if you've never played Path of Exile 2 and you'd like to hop in and just give it a try, they're going to be having a free weekend on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation 5. And they said it's going to be full progress, so you can do everything that you want to for the weekend. And then I guess if you want to buy the game, you can buy the game at that point, or maybe just never play again because you already got your money's worth. They're adding an ability to sprint by holding down the spacebar, which is mainly going to be used for travel. They specifically have this thing in there that if you get hit while you're sprinting, you're going to get knocked down and then you're going to get beat down because the monsters are going to be able to wail on you. So imagine you fall down on the ground and then all the goblins jump on top of you and make a dog pile. It's pretty nasty. But it is a very nice ability. Like, you're going to be able to run around faster while you're traversing the map, and especially if all the monsters are already dead. And specifically, they did state that if you use a skill, it would break you out of the sprint, which would prevent the knockdown. So if at any point you think that monsters are going to be nearby and they could potentially attack you, you just simply use an ability to break yourself out of the sprint. It does look like it's a good addition to the game. The new trade shop. The new trade shop looks absolutely amazing. Like, I cannot explain how good the trade shop looks. It literally looks bonkers. Basically, how they have it set up is there's a new NPC, and the new NPC is going to come to your base as soon as you get a hideout. You have to have a hideout first. Once you get to the hideout, the NPC is going to allow you to set up a shop. If somebody sees your item on the web page, the same trading web page that we've been using, there's going to be a button that they can teleport to your hideout and they can look at your shop. And not only can they see the item that they want to buy in your shop, but they can also see other items that they potentially might want to buy as well, essentially making it so you have like a little mini shop set up, and it looks absolutely amazing. I honestly think that this is going to be a huge buff for the trading community in general, and they have also talked about potentially setting it up in PoE 1 if it does well in PoE 2. So definitely give them some feedback on it if you think that it's good or bad or whatever. I'm just excited to try out the new trading system. Like, it sounds like it's a solid upgrade from the current trading system that we have. It also sounds like it works offline. So if you're not online, they can still teleport to your hideout and take a look at your shop when you're not there and potentially buy items when you're offline, which is already a huge buff over the current system, which only works when you're online. On top of that, they also said that you don't have to be present for anything to happen. So that means that when you're in your maps and you're doing your content, or you're fighting a boss, or you're in the middle of the Trial of Sekimas, or you're doing your Chaos run or whatever, and you can't really leave, or leaving is kind of a hassle, and then you don't have to leave because they can just teleport to your shop and buy the item from your shop without needing to interact with you, which does kind of remove a little bit of the interaction and the fun of it, but at the same time also frees you up to actually play the game instead of having to constantly interact with people on that stuff. which is nice and bad from two perspectives. I think it's probably more good than it is bad, to be perfectly honest. Essence changes are amazing. So they did an overhaul on the essences, and they basically made it so that the lowest tier essence, which they admitted has always been rather useless, is now going to be actually useful. It's going to function kind of like a regal orb, and it's going to have specific stats that it's going to view on the item. There's multiple tiers, all the way up to a perfect one, which is going to give some very unique and very awesome effects to your items. And I'm assuming that the essences are going to have, their own rarity. But at least the base essence, the baby essence that you get, is still going to function as a regal orb, and it's going to be very useful for lower level crafting. And then the higher essences, which we'll hold on to for higher tier crafting, are going to be obviously worth a lot more. They added some very amazing bonuses to both evasion, and they added an amazing bonus to armor. For evasion, they added a 40% mitigation known as deflecting, which is going to scale based off your evasion rating depending on like buffs that you get on your armor and on the skill tree. It's going to make it so that if you evade an attack, you take no damage. If you don't evade an attack, like if an attack is unevadable, for instance, you're going to roll a deflecting chance, which is going to be based off your evasion percentage, depending on how much deflecting percentage you have. So if it's like 50% of your evasion, then you're going to get 50% of your evasion rating as deflecting. You can get up to 100% of your evasion rating. They stated that. So like you get essentially like a 100% chance to cut the damage by 40%, which is really, really nice and fixes a lot of the problems with evasion not working against certain abilities, and also gives you some sort of mitigation, whereas evasion generally gives you none. Absolutely amazing. I think it's going to be a solid win across the board for most people. Anybody that's using evasion is going to love it. Elemental armor. So basically, there is a unique item in the game. I can't remember the name of it right off the top of my head. It's actually in the patch notes here. If I click on unique item changes, I'm pretty sure it's in here. It's called Black Braid Unique Armor, which comes with a special effect. It's called Armor Applies to Elemental Damage. And what this does is it essentially allows you to take your armor rating and apply that to your elemental damage instead, which allows you to use your armor to mitigate elemental damage, which is actually really effective. I've used Black Braid unique armor on several level ups with armor-based characters, and it was actually surprisingly effective on all of those characters, at least for the early game. Well, they're going to be adding an elemental armor bonus exactly the same as this that comes in smaller forms like 10, 15, maybe 20 or 40%, depending on the armor or the stat that you're adding in, which is going to make it so that your armor is going to utilize, for your elemental mitigations, which is going to make your armor-based characters a lot more tanky because they're going to be able to block a lot more elemental damage through stacking armor, which is also amazing. So both evasion and your armor mitigation layers are receiving significant upgrades. And I even saw one armor bonus that was on one of the ascendancies, which gave armor deflecting, which was also pretty cool. And that this one is a 40% flat reduction in any damage that comes in if you roll the deflecting. So very good changes across the board on these. They also made a pass to essentially all of the effects that were kind of like not set up properly for lower level characters. Let me set up a scenario for you and see if I can make this as simple as possible. So imagine you're a low level character and an exalt drops. Do you use the exalt? Do you hold on to it until later and maybe trade something for it? If a good essence drops, do you use it or do you wait till later and trade it? What they're trying to do with the pass that they made to all of these things is they're trying to set you up so that instead of holding on to these items to trade them later, you're encouraged to more actually use them while you're playing the game. So what they did was they kind of split up a lot of these items into tiers and made it a little bit easier for you to use these items at lower levels without feeling guilty that you're not holding on to that rare piece of currency that could potentially help you later to purchase some item. So for instance, when you find like the base level essences or like a lesser exalt or a low level boss, like you have a small amount of boss mats and not really enough to summon like the really big boss, but only enough to summon a smaller boss, they're generally just made a pass on everything to make it an easier decision so that using that stuff at lower tiers is actually good. They really just want you to play the game. That's really all it is to it. Like the crafting system, they want you to engage in the crafting system. Like the bosses, they want you to actually do the bosses and not have to wait till tier 15 to do them. Overall, it's pretty much seems to be across the board, and even the currency items are also modified in this way, where there are lower tier currency items which are specifically for lower tier characters, so that you can use those as you're leveling up, which is going to be good for you. It's just going to make the game more fun, to be perfectly honest. And of course, there are higher tier currency items and higher tier essences, and there are higher tier bosses even now as well. So there's like an Uber version of one of the bosses that requires special Uber mats, and most of the bosses have been converted from, like, for instance, the Invitation to the King. Instead of that, you're going to get shards, and it requires, I think it was 50 shards for the low tier boss, 75 for the medium tier boss, according to the screenshot they showed anyway, and 100 shards for the high tier boss, which essentially allows you to run at least 2 lower tier bosses for every 1 high tier boss, so you can actually go in and, like, fight them. On top of this, they also added a checkpoint to the Trial of Sekimas and the Trial of Chaos, so that when you die, you can respawn at a checkpoint. I'm not exactly sure what that means as far as those go, like how many times you can die. I'm assuming maybe probably only like 1 time or something. Um, they didn't really give like specific details on that, but they did specifically say that there would be a checkpoint that you could respawn at inside of those places, which is interesting. They also added new omens, which are quite interesting. There is an omen that allows you to guarantee that a chance orb will give you a unique item. You can't guarantee the unique, but you can guarantee that it will give you a unique item of that type. There's also a couple more new, good omens that you can potentially play around with, would do all sorts of interesting things. One of them is a omen that you can use on your divine orbs to cause the item to reroll either at a 80% to 120%, either decrease or increase to the item stats. And once doing so, it can no longer be crafted on at that point. It's kind of like a corruption. But it has the potential of making the item a lot better, and it has the potential of making the item a little worse as well. It's kind of strange in the way that it works, because it re-rolls the affixes, and it also increases the affixes or decreases the affixes at the same time. And so you could end up with a increase by re-rolling to a higher number, but you could also end up with a decrease by lowering the higher number a little bit. And so you could end up at a wash. Or you could end up with the 120% increase and also roll a higher amount, which can potentially have the item roll way higher than anything else. So it's going to be something that you would do as a last step, similar to corruption. You wouldn't do something as a first step. Another thing that I forgot to put in here is exceptional items. So exceptional items can roll with either 30%, up to 30% quality, or an extra socket. So this is something that you really want to pay attention to as you're in the higher tiers, because that is some pretty crazy value that you could potentially get while you're playing the game. So, like, for instance, if you are playing as a high tier character, and let's say a dual string bow drops, it's just a white dual string bow, nothing special, but you look at it and it has more sockets than it would normally. The extra socket that it can roll with potentially means that that bow can have even more sockets than any other bow in the game, right? Because if the maximum number of sockets is 2, and you found one with 3, and then you corrupt it and it gets 4, right? Now you have an item that has an exceedingly high value, and it's something that you're definitely going to want to keep an eye out for, is these beautiful exceptional items that could potentially drop at higher tiers. So don't just ignore all the white items. Make sure you're keeping your eye out for these new exceptional items that probably are going to have really good value. It's going to depend on the base, and it's going to depend on, obviously, what it rolls. But if you happen to get like a specific item that everybody's looking for, like during the season of the Huntress, everybody was looking for spears, right? So imagine you find that magical spear that can now get like 3 sockets. That's a base that's going to have some value, and people are definitely going to be interested in. I did notice that they took a pass on nerfing critical strike chance across the board. It definitely did seem like they nerfed it. They also took a pass on nerfing block chance, which I think is really just due to the fact that they made block better overall. So they made block much better overall, but then also reduced the overall block chance to try and like compensate for the fact that they really buffed nerf like entirely. I also noticed with a few exceptions that they took a nerf pass on area of effect. In general, they kind of lowered the radius of just about everything, as far as I could see, with a few notable exceptions that they actually buffed. But just about everything got like a tiny little AOE nerf, and they also stated in the reveal that they also nerfed a lot of the passive nodes for AOE as well. So it seems like they had attacked the range of explosions, the radius of specific abilities all across the board, as far as I could see. So it's definitely going to be a little bit harder to get that AOE damage and hit as many targets as you were hitting before. They buffed block and parry by allowing it to block everything, but specifically designated anti-block abilities. So before, when it came to block and parry, there were certain attacks that you just could not block. Like no matter what you were doing, no matter what attack you had, you just couldn't block anything, right? It was just they would come in and it would just go right through your attack. If it was like a slam or some sort of ability that like hit behind you and like other things, there's just a lot of abilities that just weren't being blocked. They fixed it so that basically block and parry now block and parry everything that is not specifically designated as an anti-block ability. And those are usually like a big red attack and it's really obvious and they're like, no, you can't block this. This is like a mega slam. And you got to get out of the way, right? And that's one of the reasons why it seemed like they took a nerf on block chance, because they buffed up essentially everything that block could potentially apply to. They also fixed another issue, which was sometimes like when an ability comes from a different direction than the monster. So, like, if you've ever had an attack that, like, say for instance, somebody casts frozen orb on you or whatever it's called in this one, Eye of Winter, and it goes through you and then it's behind you, right? Well, technically the monster that cast it was in front of you, but the ability is behind you, and so it wasn't being blocked because the ability was behind you, even though you were technically like blocking to the direction of the monster. So they made it so that instead of the ability being blocked by the where the ability is at that particular moment, it's instead where the monster is. Which could also fix a lot of the problems too, because a lot of the times, even though you were facing the monster, and that is potentially where the hit was coming from, and you should be blocking that hit, you were not blocking that hit. And this comes from the passive effect, by the way, not the passive effect, the active blocking, like holding your shield up. A lot of the times it wasn't blocking the effect because the direction of the monster and the direction of the skill were like two opposing things, and so there was a problem there. So they also fixed that as well. Multiple complaints fixed about multiple skills, like all over the place. We were actually very surprised because there were so many things, I can't even list them all, of like little tiny details on skills that a lot of people really just complained about, like magma spray, or magma shield or whatever, the one that where you block and it does like a magma spray. Like that one never really worked properly because you had to like block the attack and then let it go like right when the monster blocked, and it was very difficult to use. Now it just sort of, if you're holding down the button, it will just automatically activate. I think within like 8 seconds or something, it will automatically do the spray if you block an attack within that time frame. Things like the lava mace attack, which I can't remember the name of right now, they made it so that you can actually not move during the attack if that's what you want to do. I mean, across the board, it seemed like a lot of the skills got the quality of life updates that they needed to actually function properly, and I'm super excited about a lot of them. Warrior got a lot of good changes. The Gemling Legionnaire slash well, I can't remember all the ascendancies on him. Very good changes across the board for the crossbow skills. The sorceress infusion system that they added in that looks really interesting. It has to do with adding in additional effectiveness to a spell by collecting infusions, which are generated in a variety of ways. Like for instance, you can grab a lightning infusion to add lightning damage to your firewalls, which will imbue your attacks with fire damage as well as lightning damage. And then like there's other things like adding in the ice infusion to your sparks can cause them to freeze things and adds extra ice sparks that come out. A lot of very interesting things with the sorceress infusion system, and I think a lot of people are going to enjoy it. unified the negative resistance options. So there's a lot of negative resistance options in Path of Exile. You get the curses. There's like the fire curse, the lightning curse, the ice curse, the chaos curse, the frost bomb elemental weakness, the blah 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 blah. There's like 3,000 negative resistance options. So one of the things that they seem to have done is they unified all the curses into one elemental weakness curse instead of having like 3 or 4 different curses. I can't remember if the chaos one is included. The chaos one might not be included because they usually don't include that one. They also took a lot of the exposures, like fire exposure, lightning exposure, ice exposure, and unified them into a kind of a unified elemental exposure. Basically, just taking a lot of those like ridiculous numbers of options and decreasing them a little bit to a more acceptable level of options. And also, they seem to have increased the amount of negative resistance that you can get from those options to account for the fact that some of the options kind of disappeared as well. So, in general, like you can get at least seems like the same amount of negative resistance just with not having to use like 7 different sources of elemental weakness to obtain it, which is much better. They completely reworked the Chalupa monk, the Chayula monk. I played the Chayula monk like when it first came out, and I was very unimpressed. I did not like it. I tried to set up several different versions of it, like energy shield, life stealing, or mana stealing, or energy shield stealing, all sorts of various things with chaos damage, and I just didn't really like how it functioned. The changes that they've done to the Chalupa monk do look a lot better. Like I think I haven't, I actually obviously haven't tested it yet, but from what I've seen on the outside, the superficial bonuses that it currently has, I think it looks very good, and I think people are going to enjoy it now. As well as tons of other minor changes. Like there's just so many little minor changes all over the board, and like I said, I highly recommend if you want to see the full patch notes. I mean, I sat here and read them all for like multiple hours, so there is tons here, and I'll link the patch notes in the video as well if you want to go look at it yourself. Moving while using ability speed buffs, including block and parry. So across the board, any ability that has any kind of movement to it while using ability, they have kind of removed a lot of the restrictions of those. There still is a penalty, but it's a lot less than what it was before. So when your crossbow skills and like blocking and all sorts of various things that allow you to move and actually, like use the ability at the same time seem to be better. Seasonal content is the Abyssal, which is essentially a loop of killing monsters, causing the abyss to spawn, killing the monsters that spawn out of the abyss, getting specific, like bones and items that pop out of the abyss and using them to upgrade items. There's also a boss involved, which looks pretty cool, and this really cool pit that you throw your items into to upgrade. It definitely seems really interesting, as well as a kind of like hidden sort of like potential upgrade for yourself. That seems kind of nice. Support gem overhaul. They kind of overhauled a lot of the support gems. I was actually surprised to see all of the support gem changes they made, and more than you would think. So what they did is they added tiers to the support gems, tiers 1, 2, and 3. Tier 1 being the lowest support gem, and tier 2 being a middle ground, and then tier 3 isn't better than tier 2, but it does come with a special effect that tier 1 and 2 don't have. So tier 1 and 2 are upgrades. So 2 is a direct upgrade to 1 in its effectiveness, but 3 is not a direct upgrade to 2. It comes with a special sort of like ability that the other ones don't have. Like it might give you the ability to reload your shots in a specific way by like heavy stunning enemies, or it might offer you like additional like burn chance or something along those lines. It's definitely interesting. The tier 3s are interesting, not necessarily mandatory. The 2s definitely seem to be the best ones, but the 3s offer additional support that you might be interested in. They also added unique they call them Legacy, I think was the name of them, support gems with unique effects, and they're definitely very interesting. Like, for instance, there was a Spell Echo one, which instead of echoing once, it actually echoed twice, which was really cool. There was a huge number of these, and I can hardly go over them all, but they were covered in the video if you want to check out the full version. Allowed the use of as many copy of the gems as you want. This was a huge change, absolutely massive change. So in the current Path of Exile 2, unless you were a Gemling Legionnaire or using a specific item, you could only use one copy of any gem at any time. It's like if you wanted to use Brutality, for instance, you could only use one Brutality gem. But now you can use as many as you want. They kind of like sold this as essentially artificially limiting people's build freedom, and that it didn't really make a lot of sense because then you were locked to essentially one ability because some of the gems were kind of like mandatory for your build. Like, for instance, if you're a poison character and you want to set up multiple poison skills, well, there was only a couple poison gems, and well, you really couldn't set up multiple poison skills because you didn't have access to multiple poison gems. So the goal of this isn't really to like ruin the build freedom. It's actually to kind of increase the build freedom more than what we currently have, allowing you to actually maybe make a character that has multiple poison skills, you know, instead of just having like just one little baby poison skill. Which I think is much better than what we currently have. Speaking of damage overtimes and things like that, they seem to have also done a pass on dots. Which I don't know if they did this to poison, but they definitely did it to fire, which is where they added a modifier called Flammability. Flammability seems to be this feature which allows you to get a... I'm terrible. I'm sure I typed this wrong. Flammability, which basically allows you to get access. Probably just two M's. There you go. Get this interesting effect, which is essentially where you apply a buff called flammability to the target. Depending on how much damage you did, when the flammability hits the target gains like more and more flammability until eventually they're ignited. Well, the damage that you do is calculated into the flammability so that when you hit the target with, say, like, let's pretend you hit the target with some big giant explosive grenade or something, right? But it wasn't enough to ignite the target. But you did like, 5,000 damage. It's going to calculate in that you did 5,000 damage so that if you hit the target later on with something like, say, Firewall for like 5 damage or something, it doesn't give you like a little baby ignite. And instead of giving you a little baby ignite, it's going to base the ignite magnitude off of the flammability. So the flammability specifically is going to determine the ignite like magnitude instead of just simply the skill that actually causes the ignite to happen. And hopefully what this would do is would allow you to actually run multiple fire skills without having to worry about causing a little baby ignite on the target instead of a giant mega ignite like you would want, which seems to be a relatively good change overall. Another very good change that they did in a similar vein is they essentially removed almost completely armor consumption, armor break consumption. So armor break consumption was something that I just never really thought worked very well. In fact, it was kind of like antithema of actually like playing a melee character, because why would you want to remove the armor break, which is giving you more damage? And yes, removing the armor break would buff up at least the skill that you were using at that particular point, but then every single skill afterward was losing damage until you rebroke the armor. And they seem to have completely removed armor break from the game as far as I can tell. Every ability that had armor break no longer has armor break and instead has a different ability, which I can actually probably type in armor broken. No longer consumes fully broken armor, and instead hitting a fully broken enemy will apply a debuff that causes the enemy to take physical damage equal to 5% of the physical damage dealt by high velocity round that applied the debuff. And they call it, where is the... They had a name for the debuff here. I think it was called like fragmentation or something along those lines. I can't remember the name of the debuff, but there is a debuff. And as you can see here, it also does a very interesting mechanic. So in this particular case, it says equal to 5% of the physical damage dealt by the ability, right? So in this particular case, when we're talking about the way that they've changed it, it actually is really cool. I saw a kind of like a demo of it. Essentially, imagine that you did, and we'll pull up a little calculator here so we can do a calculation. Imagine you did 5,000 damage to the target, okay, and then you subtract 95% of that. Every time that you tap the target, you're going to deal 5% of that 5,000 damage to the target with any ability that you touch him with. It's going to dish out more physical damage to him in return. So take, for instance, an ability like a shotgun, like crossbow skill that has, say, like 10 pellets. You multiply that by 10, and you're going to do like 2,500 damage for 250 for each pellet every single time you shoot your crossbow at the target that has this debuff on them for the amount of damage that you did with your high velocity when you struck. Which means that if your high velocity does like 50,000 damage, and you subtract 95% from that, then you're going to do 2,500 damage per pellet times 10, and you're going to do like 25,000 damage per crossbow shot, which is pretty dang impressive considering that your high velocity only did 50,000 damage to begin with. Which means in 2 crossbow shots, you're going to immediately do the same amount of damage as your high velocity round. The goal of this apparently is to reward you for breaking the armor without taking away the armor break, and I think it's a pretty good, fair trade. Um, they did, however, lock you to 1 copy of a skill. So back during, I think it was the Huntress season, or was it a season before that? They were doing silly things like adding like 13 Tempest Bells to their skill bar and then like dropping every Tempest Bell and then hitting them all at the same time and having all these Tempest Bells go off at the same time, right? And, like GGG didn't like that. Well, apparently they really, really didn't like that because now they've locked everyone to 1 copy of any skill on your bar. So you're no longer allowed to have 2 copies of a skill on your bar and do the silly stuff like we used to do with all the Tempest spells. I tried it out too. It was kind of OP, to be perfectly honest. And they already nerfed that, and then apparently they're also locking you to 1 skill on your bar at any time, like 1 of every skill. It's funny because they took away the support gem, 1 support gem per character, and now they added the 1 skill per character, essentially, right? I don't know how that's going to work if you have like swaps. Like, I don't know if you have another weapon. Can you have like a second skill with a second weapon? I don't know. I'm assuming not. Act 4 is finally here. Looks really good. It's not really much to say about it because I haven't played it. But of the information, like of the visuals that they showed us and the storyline that they kind of shared with us, looks very good. I'm actually very excited to not have to play Act 1 again in Cruel Mode. Cruel Mode is gone, by the way. So Cruel Mode is no longer in the game. Now that we have Act 4, they have just removed Cruel Mode, and they are going to give us some additional things to do in the process. Because Act 4 has been added, and they also have an Act 4 boss, we're also going to get that Act 4 boss in its own unique kind of like boss room, similar to the way that we have the current Act bosses in the end game, where you're going to look for a specific item to be able to do that particular boss as well. So that's going to be fun to fight that in the end game version. After Act 4, there's supposed to be Acts 5 and 6, but we don't have Acts 5 and 6 yet. And instead of adding cruel or making us repeat the same things again like they did before, which definitely would have been cruel, they gave us the interludes, which, if you're familiar with anime, is basically just interlude arcs. Or filler arcs. It's essentially filler arcs. They're side stories that don't really have anything to do with the main story. They're going to be fun to do to get our level 65 by the time we're done with them. But eventually they will go once the Acts 5 and 6 are added. But it's going to give us something interesting and fun to do in the meantime for these little filler arcs. I think it'll be fun to play around with. They've also made huge additions and changes to the passive skill tree. There was a screenshot of it, but it's absolutely massive. They added 8 new clusters between the warrior and the witch, 15 new clusters in the warrior area, 23 new clusters in the mercenary area, 17 new clusters in the ranger and huntress area, 17 new clusters in the monk area, 25 new clusters in the witch sorceress area. They also added a bunch of crazy things and changed around some abilities, crazy changes to the passive tree. If you look at a picture of the before and the after of the passive tree, definitely some massive additions. They definitely did some Chongus level additions to the passive tree. Um, Overall, I'm feeling pretty good. I think this is going to be a good patch. I think Warrior and Sorceress look like really fun builds this season. They did do a couple nerfs to the Warrior, but they did a lot of buffs and a lot of fixes to the Warrior also. And I think overall the Warrior looks like it's in a better place than it was before. The Sorceress definitely has some very fun things that you can potentially do with it, and so does the Mercenary. The Mercenary seems like it has a lot of very fun things that you can potentially do with it as well. They also added some very interesting ice mechanics to the mercenary skills that allow the mercenary to get all these little exploding little ice baubles that fall all over the place, and a lot of interesting interactions with those little ice baubles as well. So a lot of good changes. I think that I've already got a couple builds like floating around in my head here. The ascendancy changes weren't really like too ridiculous. There were definitely some ascendancy changes because they allowed all of the support gems to be used by all the characters any number of times you want. They did fix the Gemling Legionnaire passive and the unique item that allowed that particular effect. They changed it to something else because, of course, the Gemling Legionnaire used to be unique in the ability to use multiple support gems, and now he is no longer unique in the ability to use multiple support gems. So, interesting. But they did give him a very interesting, like, temporary, like a buff in its place, which is if his support or his skills are mostly red, he gets hits against you have no critical damage bonus. If his skills are mostly blue, he gets 30% less cost, and if his skills are mostly green, he gets 40% less movement speed penalty from using skills while moving, which are all very interesting buffs for the Gemling Legionnaire. They also added an interesting totem, which is a crossbow totem, and it's a totem that essentially allows you to fire grenades, which is really neat. Another interesting buff to the like the basically the like the tactician really. You could probably even use them on the warrior totem as well. Not a lot of changes to Amazon, but a little nerf to the critical notable passive, which probably was needed. It is pretty powerful. I played Amazon during the like the launch, and it was such a powerful character. So I can't even really complain. They did a complete overhaul on the concoctions as well. It's that I'm not really sure exactly what to think about the concoctions, but definitely something to worth check out. Little bit of a nerf to some of the Deadeye skills, mainly in the form of the avidity, which gives you a chance to get your maximum frenzy charges. It no longer does that. It only gives you a 50% chance to gain an additional charge, which is a pretty big nerf for anyone who was stacking frenzy charges, but not as much of a nerf for those people who were not stacking frenzy charges. I think you actually get slightly better if you weren't stacking frenzy charges, and a lot worse if you were stacking frenzy charges. Like if you had 17 frenzy charges, a 30% chance to gain full frenzy charges is massive. But if you have like 3 frenzy charges, a 50% chance to gain an additional charge is way better than a 30% chance to gain maximum charges. You kind of see what I'm saying? It seems like they tried to balance it more around people who were actually using small amounts of frenzy charges than those people who were using maximum frenzy charges, which I've done both. And they're both valid builds, but the maximum frenzy charge got a lot of attention with the barrageable stuff, because of course you get all the extra bonuses from having multiple barrage frenzy charges for your barrage. These are the changes for the Acolyte of the Chayula. I'm not going to read every single one of them, but I am going to point out some of the more like important ones. Like this one right here now grants Leech recovered based on chaos damage as well as physical damage, which is really cool. Also, there's this one here, which changes your Flames of Chayula color, which was kind of interesting. And then one of the coolest ones that I saw in here was this one, which is instead, it now grants chaos damage from hits to also contribute to ignite chance and magnitude, freeze buildup, or shock chance, changing every 2 seconds. So your chaos damage will be able to freeze, ignite, and shock on a rotating pattern of every 2 seconds, allowing you to build a very interesting multiple ailment build, which could be extremely powerful. And I think there's definitely some fun to be had there with a multiple ailment Acolyte of Chayula, which could be very fun. Trying trying to think if there's anything else. Oh yeah, banners. I did forget about banners. Banners have been like kind of the poopiest things that ever existed, I swear, ever since they were invented in the game. And it's really sad because I really love like the captain in Lord of the Rings Online, which had like amazing banners. And I thought the banners in this game were like absolutely trash. They did a pass on them and they buffed them up significantly. And they also removed the Valor mechanic and instead added a different mechanic called a Glory mechanic, which doesn't seem to function the same way as the Valor mechanic, and I guess that's why they, gave it a different name. It definitely seems like they're a hell of a lot stronger than they were before. I took a look at some of the banners, and some of the banners had way stronger buffs than the previous versions. And let me go down to some of these. So here's the Defiance banner. Aura now grants 30% more armor and evasion, previously 6 to 9, and 30% increased movement speed, previously 5%. Now has a duration of 9.8 seconds, previously 6.9. So as you can see, kind of very interesting. Like it gives a lot more than the previous version. The Dread banner down here gives 0.5 flash charges, previously 0.17, 60% more elemental threshold, previously 15%, and now grants 4% to all maximum elemental resistances. Very interesting as well. And like all the banners seem to have been buffed significantly. The War banner down here grants 25% more attack damage, 50% increased attack rating, and 25% increased attack speed. All of these look like they might actually function in a build now. Like I might actually be interested in putting some of these on my character. Another one of the big changes that they made to the banners is before the banners used to disappear if you left the circle of the banner, making it so that like casting them was really stupid because you're moving really fast. A lot of the times you don't have time to stand still. Sometimes you have to dodge out of effects. And it just never really made a lot of sense that the banners would constantly disappear when you just like stepped your toe outside of them. Well, they made it so that they don't disappear anymore. If you walk outside of them, they're not going to disappear, which is very good in my opinion, and just like a much needed change. They also limited them to only one allowed to be placed at any given time. But on top of that, there also are some passive tree or tactician ascendancies, which can increase the total number of banners if you're interested in doing that. Just a good change overall, which I think is definitely going to be very nice. Other than that, they also have the weapon swap, so I almost forgot that. So they made weapon swapping instantaneous, which was a really good change. I should probably throw that down here. So weapon swap is now instant. So for those of you who like to do weapon swapping builds, but weapon swap always felt a little bit clunky, like going back and forth between, like two turds or whatever, like you like they displayed it and it was instantaneous. Like you press the button and it's just doot, 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 doot. Instantaneous. Now it's going to feel a lot better if you want to try and do like a swapping build. I think it's going to be pretty cool. They did, however, nerf some things that had to do with swapping, like apparently Blink and a couple other skills. Let me see if I can find it real quick here. So before you get too excited, there's the swapping weapons is now instant right there. There is a change in here about specific skills. Where is the specific skills? Is it swapping? There is a list of specific skills. I do believe that Blink was one of them. Yes. Okay. So Blink, Convalescence, and Sacrifice can no longer be activated in specific weapon sets. They are now required to be active in both weapon sets and will fail to activate if this is not possible. So they did limit Blink, Convalescence, and Sacrifice to essentially not be swappable. I guess they decided that they didn't like the fact that Blink, Convalescence, and Sacrifice could be put on an off weapon and then not actually used, and so you like swap over and then use it on the off weapon and then swap back to your main set. They didn't like that, so apparently they're just taking that away entirely. So if you want to use Blink, you got to have it active on both weapon sets, or it doesn't work. If you want to use Convalescence, you got to have it active on both weapon sets, or it doesn't work. And the same thing goes with Sacrifice. Spirit cost of specters. So this was a big one for the Huntress patch. There was a big thing with specters, and on some specters got turned off. Some specters got like deleted from existence. Some got rebalanced and like nerfed and a bunch of other things. They rebalanced all the specters, so rebalanced the specters to essentially cost kind of like the same amount. So those with high spirit costs are now generally cheaper, and those with low spirit costs are generally more expensive, and they should be about the same now, is what they're trying to say. They also increased the damage of both the Spectre Beast and the Tame Beast by 25% on all gem levels, and they also reactivated some of the Spectres that had been disabled. I don't remember all the ones they reactivated, but I could potentially just search for Spectre. Bind Spectre, not that one. Treant Foulspawn can once again be bound as a Spectre, so that one's there, right there. They also added some penalties for lower resistance. So this was something that I noticed. It was a very specific change. Here it is. So this is the more specific change. So elemental exposure now has 15% less effect on blue monsters, 30% less effect on the yellow monsters, and 50% less effect on the unique monsters. So this means that if, for instance, you have negative 50% to a specific negative, elemental exposure, then it's only going to be 25% on that unique monster instead of 50. And this is across the board for a lot of this stuff, so it's definitely something that you want to pay attention to. They also kind of nerfed it in another way. So a lot of people in the past may have been using, like a relatively low-level curse, right? So you might have been using a curse that has like very, very low level, like maybe a level 8 curse or something, or a level 9 curse, just to get away from stat, reductions, because you don't have enough stats to actually use the curse, and you're just trying to squeeze it in to make sure that it actually works. Well, they also added a kind of a penalty here, and this is it right here. Curse skills and skills that apply elemental exposure cannot apply those debuffs to enemies that are significantly higher level than the skill's own level requirement. This requirement is fairly lenient and disappears completely by high level gems. So basically what this means is that if you had a relatively low tier curse, like say like a level 8 curse or something, and you try to use that on a relatively high level monster, it just will not work. They seem to be very upset with people using low tier gems to get away from stat requirements, and they're trying to prevent that from occurring. However, conversely, on the other side, one thing that I did forget to mention is that they also lowered stat requirements across the board. So they lowered stat requirements of skills and gems. I believe it's also support gems. And I think also some equipment. I can't remember the full amount of it, by about 25%. They lowered essentially the stat requirements by a lot. They saw that a lot of people were having trouble like getting access to pieces of equipment. I wonder if that's actually in here. 25%, 25%. There's so many 25% in here. Good job, Ginger. That is definitely not the correct thing to search for, sir. Sources. No, sources of area of effective and low by 25%. Yeah, I remember that one. There's so much to go through on these patch notes. They were absolutely massive. Just like my head. I'm just kidding. Just like my dog is more like it. Yeah, many supports have multiple tiers as you progress, providing different stat values. It's in here somewhere, but you just take my word for it. I don't really need to find it. It's about 25% reduction across the board. So if you were looking at something that had about, say, like 212-ish like stat requirement before, it's probably somewhere around like 150, 140 at this point. Which is going to help a lot in using the gems. So even though you can see that they're trying to prevent you from using the low tier gems, they also reduce the stat requirements so you shouldn't have to use the low tier gems. It should make it a lot easier to reach that point. One of the things that they were trying to say was that with this stat in decrease is that they felt like a lot of people were spending most of their passive points on essentially stats, right? So like when you're in the passive tree, most of the points that you were spending were on strength, dexterity, or intelligence. And you weren't really spending a lot of time spending those points on the things that actually made your character special or strong in any way, shape, or form. You just let me get my 200 strength, or let me get my whatever. Speaking of 200 strength, they also changed the passive that gives you the ability to wield a one-hander in a two-hander in one hand. It seems like they might have removed the stat requirement, but I'm not sure. It was kind of like it was kind of vague, but it definitely did seem like they changed the penalty in some way. So it might not require triple strength anymore. I mean, that's something that I'm going to have to check when I log in. I think that's pretty much it. I tried to remember everything, and even though I tried to surmerge this as much as possible, it still took me like 50 minutes to go over all these notes, and that just par for the course. I mean, since it took me literally like what was it, 4 to 5, 5 to 6, 6 to 7, 7 to 8, 8 to 9, 9 to 10, 10 to 11, like 5, 6, 7 hours to go over all these notes. I guess 50 minutes isn't that bad, and you can always play me on 2 times. I think this is going to be a really good patch. I'm excited for it. A lot of good changes, a lot of things that I complained about, like personally. Like I was complaining about a lot of these things, like individually, and like block not working against everything, and evasion, like all the things going through evasion, and you're getting hit anyway, and like how evasion just didn't really protect you against damage when you did get hit. Now evasion does protect you against damage when you get hit. You can actually block everything now. Like a lot of the small things, like the fact that the lava spray, like would always move whenever you did it. You can actually stand still while you're using it. The magma barrier actually allows you to like block properly now and hold down the button, and you don't have to release it all the time. Like there's so many good changes that I think that this patch is going to be absolutely amazing. Another little tiny thing that I did forget was they moved around a lot of the levels. Around a lot of the levels of the skills. Some went up, some went down. So when you log in and you see like the skill panel, it might look a little bit different than you remember, because like some of the skills might be a little bit higher level than others. Some of the skills might be a little bit lower level than the others. It might take a little bit of getting used to. In fact, it's kind of crazy. There's so many changes here. So many changes that it honestly probably might even feel like a different game when you log in. Between the support gem changes, the essence changes, the skill changes, the movement changes, like the freaking player changes, the ascendancy changes, the passive changes, the unique changes, just one after the other. Like the Act 4, the interludes. It's gonna be like a whole new freaking game on August 29th. I will be there, of course. It's August 29th, off at 1 p.m. I think PST, and it's gonna be fun. I hope you enjoyed this little, little patch note covering Doojank. If you want to see the full version, I'll put the link for that video down in the description as well for you. And as always, keep watching.